Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Microbiome Solution, week one. I'm Eilers-Heffner. I'm going to be just sharing some of my takeaways that I really enjoyed getting out of this book. I listened to it twice, the chapters. It's free on Audible right now. So if you have the book, but you'd like to listen or whatever, it is free on Audible. And I keep reminding people of that too. So that's pretty cool. So the introduction I thought it could have been a whole chapter, right? The introduction was really good. I'm just gonna cover it briefly, but really what I liked that she said is that um, you know, I felt like I could write that part. Like we live in a toxic world. We're too clean. We use too much soaps and sanitizers. And why is it that, we had like 5 vaccines the first 8 years of our life, and now they want to give 27 to these little bodies. And how she grew up like dirty and then grew up and everything changed, more sickness. And then her daughter was super sick as a young child where she had, never had those same issues, and just kind of really thinking and digging into what the difference was. She's like, let's buy a homestead and get some chickens and have mucky chores. I've told my husband that several times. Can we just move and get some chickens and goats and, whatever, just be out in the country and dig in the dirt. So, which is funny because I don't love gardening, but I do want to have more opportunity to have those dirtier chores for the kids, to have chickens and things like that. And then as we've unwild our environment in order to become more healthy, we've actually become more sick. So, and then just all the antibiotic usage has really been linked to a lot more issues. So, we grew up like gardening with our parents, always being outside. We took baths, but we weren't like, my mom never freaked out about us being dirty, things like that, right? But I was sick. I was born like 4 weeks early, and I had pneumonia as a 2-week old. So I was in the hospital. I was on antibiotics, all this stuff, right? And then I had lots of ear infections and strep throat my whole childhood. And then now I have 3 autoimmune issues, right? And so I'm like, well, of course, I was kind of set up to fail a little bit in terms of that. And I want to remind everyone that, if you've taken antibiotics or you've given them to your kids or whatever decisions you've made them because you were doing the best that you could at that time with the knowledge that you had, right? And so we can't beat ourselves up about X, Y, and Z. And that's why we're also doing this book, because she has, what else can we do to help our gut bacteria? What else can we do to heal our bodies? And so we're going to learn more about that too. And so that's cool. So just, we got to keep that in mind that, my mom was saying that I almost died. I would have died if they hadn't treated me. So of course I had antibiotics, right? So just keep that in mind too. Chapter 1, the zoo inside of you. We have bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, and worms. So I'm like, oh goodness, like that doesn't sound good, right? But I thought that really stood out to me, that there are some beneficial parasites in our bodies, or if that's just part of our microbiome, that it's not necessarily harmful. And I found that really interesting, because I think we hear, and there's um, ebbs and flows of things that are popular, especially in the crunchy realm. So if you follow any like crunchy Instagram pages like I do, it's like parasites are bad. You have to detox from parasites. You have to do a parasite cleanse, da 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 da. And she's saying that that's not necessarily the case. So I found that kind of encouraging. Like, okay, so for some people, this could be all right. I thought this was really interesting that during pregnancy, the increase in lactobacilli is protective to the developing baby. And okay, hold on. That also, there are bacteria that are responsible for weight gain in the breast in order for the mom to produce milk for her baby. Okay. So you guys, if you're on, just try to make sure you stay muted so that we don't have too much distraction, because I'm definitely at that point in my life of distractions. Um, so protect me, protect my brain over here. So anyway, I thought that was really cool and that they proved it. It's not just they what did they do? They put it in the mice or something, and it definitely was the bacteria responsible, not I don't know what she said. I didn't write that part down, but she said that was definitely the bacteria responsible for the milk production. And then we have these protective antibodies in the placenta. So that's super cool. And, my friend a long time ago had said, there's lots of really good benefits that you're passing on to the baby when you're pregnant and you're taking probiotics and eating fermented foods, right? And I think it's interesting, like what you crave. So when I was pregnant with Sam, I craved sauerkraut. I wanted to eat sauerkraut all of the time, like super weird, right? Well, there must have been something in that my body needed to protect him. And then we have birth, and so that vaginal exposure is really good bacteria for babies. And this is one of those cases like people have had C-sections, and then we're like, oh my gosh, I had a C-section. I'm the worst mom ever. No, that's not the case. And we just know more now. So now I'm pretty sure it's standard practice as I've never had a C-section, and I haven't been in the hospital now for a couple years, but they swab the mom and then they like stick that swab all over the baby's nose and oral passages in order to still expose a C-section baby to those bacteria. So that's cool. That's a great thing. Now, my Emmeline, she was born in her amniotic fluid. The sac never broke. She came out in it. So I'm like, and I, of course, didn't think this at the time. Like, we need to swab her, like we need to do this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is she going to have gut bacterial issues like a C-section baby because she didn't have that exposure, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. She's very healthy. We doesn't have gut issues. So I'm like, I don't know, maybe because they popped the water and she was still like, had just come out. So maybe she still somehow got an exposure. I don't know. Um, but things you wish you would have known or thought of in the moment, right? Um, so kind of interesting. So if you guys have anyone that has a baby in their sack, make sure you tell them to still swab because it's like, why not? It's not going to hurt them. And then you have that C-section babies do have a little more risk for some stuff like the asthma and allergies and whatnot. But again, this is where we can influence gut bacteria. And so that we know, okay, my baby was a C-section. I'm going to work on these things a little more diligently, right? We just can be more empowered with the knowledge that we have now. Breastfeeding really helps to increase survival rate in babies, which is wow, like 20%. And this book is not that old. Like that's a wild statistic, I thought. And then we have that in infancy, like, so I'm a physical therapist, I'm a pediatric physical therapist or an old person PT. And so normal development babies want to bring their hands together. They want to put their hands in their mouth a lot. They want to put things in their mouth. A lot of it is like, that's how they're learning, like what and where things are. It's how they're learning body awareness, but they're also getting tons of good bacteria exposures, which is pretty cool. Like we're designed to put things in our mouth in order to develop our immune systems and gut bacteria. And then we have that child to adulthood, and that most of our gut bacteria is pretty developed by 3. So think if you have little ones, think if you have grandchildren, or just, this could be a great post just to let people know, like, get your kids some fermented foods and some probiotics, right? We have a good one. And then there are several transitions in our gut microbiome, which I didn't really think about until I read this, like with menstruation as we age, or the age in which we start to menstruate, pregnancy, menopause. Sorry, guys, I don't know what all changes in you guys. Maybe you get off the hook. I don't know. So women have lots of changes to look forward to multiple times in our lives with our gut microbiome. And then we have this modern life, right? Medications, the over processed diet, our sanitized lifestyle, and that can lead to problems with the microbiome. But she is going to tell us too, again, how we can really help to renew our microbiome. And then working into chapter 2, this was really cool that our microbes affect our organs and our digestive tract to tell us. They help to say, like, this is food you need to digest. This is what you need to excrete. This is an infection, or this is harmless bacteria. That's pretty wild that our bacteria is that distinguishable. Like, wow, whoever really thought about that? So that's cool. And I really liked how she talks about how our microbes are turning genes on and off, like hugely influential. So I know Shoshana Eastling, she was super sick with like Lyme and some other things like Lyme, and Lyme was her big one. And she was having like her genes tested and stuff all the time, and they kept changing. And so this kind of explains that it's the gut bacteria. And so she signed up and like started the products, and like she was like picking out a wife for her husband. Like I know it sounds weird, but she's like, if I die, like maybe he could marry her. Like she just was that ill. She was that sick that she thought I need to get my affairs in order and whatever. And then when she went to even sign up for Plexus, she couldn't remember her own, because at the time we used a social security number, right? No, you guys remember the good old days. And so she couldn't remember her own, and so she put her husband's in. Like that's how like her brain was. She had this long strip of gray hair. That is all reversed. Like her body just responded so quickly because a lot of it was had to have been this bacterial, the good bacterial exposure that she got from our product. So that was pretty cool. And then we have three types of bacteria: the ones that are happy cohabitating with us, commensal, I don't know, symbiotic. So these are going to help keep us healthy, and then pathogenic. So those are the ones that make us sick, that can cause problems, and there. But I think it's also interesting. I feel like, even though there's those pathogenic bacteria in our body, it doesn't mean that we're sick. Because if we have the good stuff and we aren't in a depleted state, then it's not going to make us sick, right? Um, so that bacteria, we have to break down our food in order to absorb the nutrition. And so our gut bacteria really helps to digest our food, maintain a healthy gut lining, crowd out the harmful bacteria, and train our immune system to distinguish the good and the bad. And I thought this was interesting. So the short chain fatty acids are being converted, that our intestinal cells need to use for energy. So we think, okay, our intestinal cells actually need to have the ability to have energy in order to do their job, right? So pretty cool that gut bacteria is helping to digest those short chain fatty acids. And then we're in synthesizing enzymes, vitamins, and hormones, like super cool. And this is what we talk so much about in ProBio 5. ProBio 5 is helping us to digest. It's helping to heal our gut lining, because you're also decreasing inflammation. BioCleanse plays a role in this too, because it's helping to have an oxygenated environment. And she talks about that with the morning breath, that when our mouths are closed and we're sleeping, there's less oxygen, and then you have this buildup of bad bacteria and stinky breath. So then you think, okay, BioCleanse helps to oxygenate our GI tract, helps to oxygenate our body, which is going to then help keep the bad bacteria at bay, help our gut lining to heal. So super cool. And then, crowding out the bad bacteria, that's huge with ProBio 5. That's why it has grapeseed extract in it. That's why it has the Saccharomyces boulardii, and then it has the other probiotic strain. So ProBio 5 is like, when people ask me like, what is my favorite product, hands down ProBio 5. And I think also because I noticed such a huge change in my family when we started taking that versus having taken probiotics for years prior. I'm kind of skipping ahead of my notes, but she also talks about how, people are exposed to the same thing and they don't get sick. So since November, I've worked in a new environment of several different schools, several different little preschoolers. I've had several kids cough and sneeze in my face because they wait until they're coming down the stairs and I'm like guarding them, then they sneeze here, not at waist height where they walk around. They wait until they're coming down the stairs and sneeze on me. My adult child, she was in the gait trainer, and I went to start undoing her legs and stuff, and I was bent over and she sneezed on me. I'm like, you just sneezed on me. And I was joking, but the classroom door was open and the entire class started laughing. And then one of the teachers came out with Kleenex and hand sanitizer. And I was like, well, she did sneeze on my back. I was like over like this, so she didn't get me in the face or anything, but thank you for responding so nicely to like help me not be covered in a sneeze. So anyway, done that. My kids have all been sick. My husband's been sick. People at work have been sick. And I think the Lord have not been sick. I think I've fought it off a couple times where I felt a little close, but I think being really, really diligent to staying on top of my products and also having been on them for a while has really, really helped to develop my bacteria, right? So that's pretty cool. And then when we first started the products, my husband he had started using them and then he kind of just stopped, like, okay. But the other 5 of us were using them and we got some sort of GI bug in our house and we all went about our days, 0 interruption. I took the kids to the park. Everybody went to school. No one missed anything. We did have a little like, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. Oh, okay, that was weird. And he was in bed sick for like 4 days, like deathly ill with just GI upset. Like thought he was going to die. And I'm like, oh, well, we just did our own science experiment. We didn't get sick. We're taking ProBio 5. We did not get sick. Like I said, we had a little like something, but it wasn't anything that stopped us from living our daily lives. And he was sick for days. So I've just have so much belief in what Plexus has done with our products that I'm just so grateful. So grateful. So anyway, she goes on to be really specific. Well, she talks about so many things, you guys. Like, I'm like, I don't want to just reread the whole book, right? But I like that she talks about how our unique bacteria is developed over time. So it depends on our parents' bacteria, where we work, where what we eat, if we did receive breast milk or formula, what kind of occupation. So I know too, when I first started working, I worked in a hospital and then I moved and I worked in a different hospital and I moved. And every time I went to a new hospital, I would get sick because I had to like get exposed to those microbes in that facility, really is what it kind of came down to, which is interesting. So I'm really curious to know, like I'd love to really know what's living inside of me. It's kind of cool. Exposure to toxins and chemicals, like this is another big one where people that maybe work jobs that are exposed to chemicals all day long and just their health over time, what that looks like that's super influential. I mean, we've had this discussion for 20 years about we're not spraying our lawn with a bunch of chemicals because I don't want my kids around that. Now I don't want my pet around it. The kids aren't like on the grass like they used to be. They're still playing out there. I don't want chemicals on my lawn, right? Medications, our hormone levels, like emotions, because stress can really affect our microbiome. Like, oh boy, Elizabeth, more vital biome over here. So really, really interesting. And it's even more a bigger identifier of us than our DNA. So I was like, whoa, that's cool. So anyway, that was that for, oh, I just skipped back, you guys. Goodness sakes. I really found the immune regulation and gene modulation super interesting. I'm not going to reread it. It's just that our bacteria is so influential in what genes are being expressed and rewritten and what isn't. And that's identifiable in twins. So even Sue and Sal, they had very different health issues prior to starting the product. So they've both had amazing results, right? But they didn't have the same ailments before they started the products. They had different stuff and they're identical twins. So that's really, really interesting to see that. It kind of like, it's our own little sample size and pink power of what we're seeing happen. And then you're only as healthy as your gut bacteria. So that is super interesting. I kind of touched on that where everyone around me was sick and I wasn't. I think we've all had that experience too. And then, a lot of times they say that who's at risk for the flu, really young people and really old people. And that is because little ones are still developing their microbiome and older people have started to lose their microbiome. So linking it specifically to microbiome, I thought was really interesting. because I was like, oh, little kids, their bodies are just smaller and still developing and they can't fight stuff off. And older people have, lost some of that oomph and strength and things that they have. And so they're more susceptible. Well, it looks like we can influence that greatly, right? And then Melissa Allen just posted the 100-year-old lady who's setting world records and running, and she started running at 70 years old. Like, okay, it's not because we're frail when we're older. It's because our gut microbiome has changed, or maybe more exposure to meds and antibiotics, things like that. So anyway, that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover, I think. Yeah, and then she just goes in again to occupation and how we were fed and just different things. So anyway, would love to hear what you guys have loved so far.
I'm just finding it so incredibly fascinating to dive deeper and to learn about our bodies. Like how truly wonderful God made our bodies and these little bacterias and the weird parasites and whatever else, to protect us and to keep us healthy and to help everything function. And then like in modern days, we've like gone and ruined it. Like I mean, not totally, but with good intention, right? And like you had mentioned, like we do the best we can with the knowledge that we are presented with at the time. And I know both my kids were C-sections, so I found it very interesting, that I knew the benefits of like squeezing out the mucus, so they can breathe better after, but I never thought about the bacteria being transferred to them. Um, and they had to be C-sections. But yeah, so it's fascinating to me because Hannah was a preemie and she had pneumonia at birth. Her one lung was collapsed, and they had to give her like antibiotics right away, life-saving stuff. And then she had pneumonia 9 times before she started kindergarten. So she was in and out of the hospitals a lot. She had a lot of antibiotics. Ethan had a ton of ear infections, strep throat. He's a strep B carrier, so he had a long-term dose he has pandas, which is part of strep too. So he had a long-term use of antibiotics to kind of control his teeters. That's a whole nother level. But with all that being said, looking at them, had I known back then what I know now and the gut microbiome, I could have been helping offset a lot of that medicational use with a good probiotic. And I always fed them healthy foods, but I can have to say not so much fermented foods. Like we had like milkshakes that contained Greek yogurt, which was good, and walnuts and blueberries. But that was their like special treats. But I never did a probiotic. So, learning like and just reminiscing about my kids and like where their microbiome is and then looking at them now, their tummy issues that they have. Luckily they're pretty healthy, but Ethan had really bad asthma. They both have bad allergies. It just all links together. So this is so fascinating. I know so many people when you start thinking about your friends' kids, like how common these struggles are. So yeah, this is truly, truly fascinating.
It's super, super interesting. And, I think too, well, it's so good that you have tools now too that you can give to them. And how Plexus, like our vitamin is gut, supports the gut microbiome. This new iron supplement supports the microbiome. So we do a lot. The lean has digestive enzymes and prebiotics and all like to support the microbiome. And so we have so many tools that are really easy to take in instead, because I know, maybe old school was like you have to eat like 1,200 fermented foods a day. And GAPS diet is the gut and psychology something. It's like a super strict gut-friendly diet that I was actually starting to look into because of my autoimmune issues before I found Plexus. And Jessica Hugendorn, so she's a naturopathic doctor who supports Plexus. She's a diamond, but prior to that, she was a GAPS practitioner. So she put people on this super strict bone broth and like, so there's not that much stuff you can eat, and then fermented stuff. It's like this whole, it's like an 18-month protocol, you guys. Like, it's intense. Like, there is zero eating out, there's zero like convenience foods. And so anyway, it was really cool when I first started learning about Plexus. Like, here's this GAPS practitioner promoting Plexus because it can do the same thing, but so much more readily and real life friendly than trying to do just bone broth for 18 months. I mean, it's not just bone broth, but it's this whole regimen, right? Fermented foods are great, but like it's really difficult to eat enough fermented foods in order to like replenish all the things. But it's still really, really good to have different fermented foods in your diet, even with our probiotics, even with our supplements, because we want to keep feeding the good bacteria and exposing more and more of the, finding more and more good strains of bacteria too. So when people are like, how many of these can I take? Or how many of this? I'm like, you're not going to take too much. Like, you might get some digestive upset if you took like 8 probio 5s, but it's not going to hurt you. Like, it's not a medication.
I wanted to comment on what Heather had said about the older population not going out as much. There's also, now that my mom lives with us, there's also, they change their diet, right? When they get into their 60s and 70s, especially 70 and beyond, where they eat a lot of the same easier convenience foods made for one and two, if they're lucky enough to sell their spouse. And they're just not as diverse. Like, they're just not taking in the fermenting, unless that has been their healthy way for decades. That's not what they're aiming for in their 70s, is more inconvenient food. Um, and Rochelle, I was going to tell you, so I had all 3 of my kids were C-section, and the first one has the immunity of a horse. I don't know if it's because my water had been broke for 19 hours before he was delivered, and he had dropped, but he got stuck. So he was canal stuck and had to be taken back out the other way. And so I think he got some of the benefits of that. Where my second one was a water break, scheduled C-section, all that good stuff. She was sick and is still pretty sick, like all the time. And my third, luckily enough, and I'm remembering this now after I had talked with Elizabeth earlier, they did, and she's 19, so she was birthed but swapped. And she's pretty dang healthy for 19 and having come that way. But yeah, definitely ate different with number 3 than the first 2. I was 33 at the time. I had learned a little. And so I don't know if that also helped, that my body in and of itself was already in a better stasis than it was, at 22 and 24 with the first 2. But just thankful that with all of my autoimmunes, I haven't passed those on to my children. None of them have broke out with anything or have any arthritic tendencies. And so I'm just hoping that we're doing better, right? Because our genetics are our genetics, but just hopeful that they're not all passed on. And yes, it's so good to see everybody.
We're so glad to have you, and I get to see your face. I love it. This isn't related to any specific comment necessarily, but or even the like specifically to the book, but I think of how like when what is it the Gen Xers parents were both working. Like, Gen X was kind of that generation that parents are working, and so food would, like, our parents were busy, so they weren't like, let me feed you a bunch of crap, but they were like, oh, this is cool, I can go to work and I can make this mac and cheese and it's super easy and we can all sit down together as family, right? And so like inadvertently we did affect our microbiome and things like that just by, and like a box of macaroni and cheese probably in the 80s was way less horrible for us than it is now. I am just guessing. But still the quality was so different than making something homemade and things. So it's really interesting to see like that shift. And I didn't look up any studies, but I would be curious to see like where the autoimmunities are and different diseases and the Crohn's and whatever with different generations. I know at convention, like Jason Dorsey talked a lot about different generations and communication and preferences and things like that. But I'm wondering too, like, okay, who's going to study their health? Who's going to study their diseases and what's most common in those generations would be really interesting.
So can I share something else again? Oh my gosh. So the other thing that I have to consider is the 3 years leading up to me getting pregnant with our youngest. We lived overseas in Europe where food's just cleaner. It's whole. We bought most of our food 2 to 3 days at a time at the local grocery. No chemicals, world ancient grains. And like I said, even at 33, my body was much better off then than it had been at 24 with the middle one. Because it is not a worldwide problem, this whole like gut microbiome imbalance. We are the worst nation, I think. Like it's insane what we've done to our food supplies. But yeah, it's something to consider. All food, all ingredients. Like mac and cheese Kraft probably had 12 ingredients in the 80s. Now it has like 37 or something. Definitely worth looking into.
Well, I think that even in Europe, like in Germany and stuff, I learned this a long time ago now, and it like there's American mac and cheese on the shelves, but it has like warning labels on how toxic it is. But you can go to the German shelf, right, and get German boxed mac and cheese, and it's like you said, Nicole, it's like a few ingredients, not 37. So it's really interesting what our government allows me in our food that isn't always food. It's consumable ish. It's not necessarily food. And I think too that impacts like how we eat and what we I'm actually going to talk about this on my gut health and happiness thing that I'm doing the end of the month, but like there isn't necessarily inherently good and bad food, good food, bad food. It's that there's food and there's non-food, right? But if you're eating real food, like what actual real food is really bad? It's the non-food that's probably that is the worst, right? I liked Jade's reel. She's like, a picture of her daughter, like with the sunglasses on, eating cookies. Like, your mom does some research and figures out how to read labels or whatever, and learn the healthy swaps. And now you can eat as many cookies as you want. I'm like, yes, that's exactly it, right? Like, I've never had to like stop my kids from eating like processed food, yes. But if I make avocado cookies, I'm like, here, they'll be gone in a day. Fine, it's okay. Like they're running around so much, it's fine. So, and she does talk too about the sugar thing and how I might have listened too far ahead. So I don't think it was in these chapters, but just the sugar and the more we crave sugar, and that's so damaging to the microbiome too.
I just wanted to echo a little bit of what Nicole was saying, because we spent 10 days in Rome in March, and it wasn't until we were coming home and I was eating something on the airplane and got heartburn that I realized I had not had heartburn the entire time we were in Rome. And that's something that kind of flares up for me pretty regularly at home if I'm not sticking to a cleaner diet. And I was just eating what they put in front of us in Rome. We were eating in restaurants the whole time. But it was good, whole food. And it was just such a huge difference. It was just really cool. So it's been making me pay attention more to what our labels say. And I'm listening to a really good book called Ultra Processed People, I think. And if there's even one ingredient that you would not find in your kitchen, then that's considered an ultra processed food. And what a difference, our bodies just don't process them like they process the real stuff. The other thing you said too, Elizabeth, about environments, since I started taking Plexus, I mean, I work in a school and, I call it my petri dish. Little people sneezing and coughing and, touching everything. And I stay faithful to my Plexus and I just don't get sick. I don't. And I used to get sick every winter, regardless, even before I worked in a school. So I think it's that combination of being exposed to those bacteria and all those germs that the kids are bringing in, and then staying really faithful to keeping my gut healthy that is making all the difference there. And I love this book. I love her style of writing. It's just so engaging. It's a topic that you might go, really? I've had it on my shelf for probably, I don't know how many months. And I kept thinking, I need to read this. I need to read this. And I'm like, yeah, well, whatever. And I picked it up and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So I'm really glad you guys chose this one.
Same. I have had it for several years since Plexus came out with the microbiome, the Microbiome Slim, the new Slim. And I've had that book since then, and I've peeked through it. I've read little bits, but I've never read it. Now it's free on Audible. It's a little bit older or something, so that works, right?
I agree. I really like this book. It makes it very interesting, even though it's very sciencey, and it's good. And Christy, what you shared about your reflux and everything too, it makes me think, a couple last year or a year before, I was having issues with reflux and had to end up going to the ENT to figure it out. And he's like, Melissa, you have like none of the symptoms. And as he was helping me, try to get rid of it and get to the root cause, he's like, you need to really look at like your processed food. And it's not even if you eat a ton of it, because we're pretty healthy eaters and over the years have eliminated a lot of that stuff. But, even just looking at like where your produce is from, getting organic stuff, looking at where your meat is from and what all that is exposed and how all of that like trickles down to our body and actually affects our microbiome. And as I was able to really kind of weed out some of these things that were, causing me issues, then I was able to get off these medications and all of that and take care of my symptoms that I was having.
That is awesome. That's great. Because you were working really hard and kind of really getting frustrated, right? Like doing all these healthy things. What is going on? So interest, and she talks how pregnancy changes our microbiome, and you went through two really great pregnancies relatively close together, and then that can tip scales in that microbiome too, right? So yeah, the ultra processed food is so interesting. Like if I can't go and make a Dorito, then we shouldn't be eating it. If I can't go and make an Oreo, like, because you can pick up like a granola bar and you could probably buy most of those ingredients. Like you can buy corn syrup and oats and soy lecithin. Like you can buy all those things and you could make it. Not that I'm promoting eating a granola bar because soy is not good for you either, but talk about influencing your hormones. And it's still processed. But the point is that probably is overall less processed than a Dorito or an Oreo or whatever, stuff like that. And believe me, like I do like a good Cool Ranch Dorito every once in a while, but I just can't let them live in my house either. Like cannot, because I'll eat them. And that I don't want to eat that stuff. So those are such good points. And there's so many good and easy swaps. Like if you look in like the freezer section at the grocery store and they want to sell you French fries, like if you cut your potatoes right and season them right and throw them in the air fryer, like you're going to have a really good fry, like really delicious, really satisfying, where you can do those swaps and still be so far ahead of the game. And that's not even difficult. That just takes a few minutes to do. Frying the burger grease. I like that idea. Oh. All right. You guys got anything else that you want to talk about, share?
So just quickly, I wanted to touch on the fact that when we were raising our kids, one thing that Melissa and I had talked about was like, we're not going to be one of these households that's sanitizing everything. We're one of those families that, okay, the binky fell on the floor, you wipe it off and I give it back. Because we understood enough of that there's some healthy bacteria out there. We hadn't been introduced to plexus and understood the microbiome, but relatively speaking, our kids are healthy. They've got their allergies and a few autoimmune disorders, but they're not running to the doctor's office every couple of months during the winter. So yeah, I think there's definitely something to the healthy bacteria and helping enhance our immune system.
Absolutely, for sure. And just think too how, because now you do know so much more, you can continue to help your kids be even healthier and develop even better bacteria and good things. So I know, so Emmeline, I just remembered this. So she was the one born in the sack, and we went for a well child, and they were like, oh, this and this and this. And then it was a well child a while ago. I think it was not she went for one with my husband in the winter. So it was the previous one. And at the previous one, they're like, oh, she hasn't been here for a sick visit in 3 years. And even then, it was probably like pink eye or something that like, I didn't know how to fix her pink eye without something. And she was miserable, like literally miserable, right? Um, and so now it's been 4 years since she's had a sick visit. So, and she was a year old when I started Plexus, and she has always had ProBio and BioCleanse. And when I first started, I took Uslim and split it between the four of them. So like Ella got the most because she was the biggest, and then Jack got the second most because he was the second big. And then, so she only got a little bit. And I like that was one of my goals too, is to get enough income with Plexus to be able to for all of my children to have all the Plexus that they would need. We didn't have the kids drink at all. We did have the kids vitamin. And so Sam and Emmeline would split a vitamin because I'm like, I got 4 kids. Like this needs to last a while until my paycheck grew, right? Um, and so it's pretty cool that Emmeline does not, I mean, she really started the products really young, and all of my kids are really quite healthy, quite healthy. We've worked on some teenage hormonal balance stuff, but I think we're getting to the bottom of it, and that's been really good too, because again, these hormone changes really can affect all of that. All right, you guys, I'm going to end the recording. Thanks for getting on.